Hello, everyone. I am not Jim Klein. I mean, I know that's a big shock for everybody. I am Diana Brandon. Jim Klein was out today, so I am filling in as ASKe host. And I'm super excited to see everybody as you're popping in. We're going to get started right away because, oh, he's lurking in the audience. Of course he is. We're going to get started right away so that we can hear from our wonderful presenters today. We have Logan Arrington, who is a 2018 graduate of the ISLT PhD and is currently at University of West Georgia. And we have Jeff Phillips, who is a 2018 master's and 2021 PhD from ISLT, who is with us still at the FSU library. And we have Dr. Reeser, who is most recently Professor Emeritus with us, and who is enjoying his retirement, but is fortunately back with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Logan because you do not want to hear me talk.
Just give them a couple of minutes and they're not going to want to hear me talk either. So don't worry about that. All right, so we will jump right in and get started. So I am sharing screen now, and hold on, I'm crazy. I like to get all my other Zoom stuff set up. All right, so let's get started. So the title of our presentation today is What's Trending, and we're introducing kind of an open and interactive tool that's going to help you stay on top of what's being used in our field. So the purpose of our session is going to be pretty interactive. Probably not a shocker that Jeff and I, and Dr. Reeser is probably the most formal presenter of us all, but I think even in his retirement, he's growing to be more informal. So we're going to just kind of work together, talk, have a lot of conversation, and just really kind of reflect on how to make this tool that we're sharing as useful as possible to you in what you're doing and to others in our profession. So just really quickly, Deanna gave a great introduction, but here's our team. So unfortunately, we're not being joined by Allison today, but as Jeff said earlier, she is here in spirit. So if you sense anything off in the Zoom room, blame Allison. So if we encounter any technical issues, we will also blame Allison. So, and then of course, so this team started with Dr. Reeser and some other ISLT folks that we'll give a nod and acknowledgement to in the presentation in just a bit. But right now, so we're technically a three-organization collaboration with three different entities: Florida State, University of West Georgia, and Allison at ETS being represented. So now I'm going to ask this question: what's trending? So I'm going to switch over to a nice little tool here, and I want you guys. I'm going to put the link in chat too, so y'all don't have to type anything. So I want y'all to tell us, which of these tools or strategies do you believe are kind of like the top 5 right now? So I think we have 10 options and you're able to pick up to 5. So I put the little link in chat there. And so as you respond, it should start popping in. If you're unfamiliar with any of the acronyms, augmented reality, virtual reality is there, AR, VR, OERs are open educational resources. So I think those are the only abbreviations we use. But so we'll give a couple of seconds for y'all to vote, and we'll see what kind of shakes out. Yeah, I think online learning will stay up there at the top. So good to see that. Interestingly, I'm like AR, VR, and learning analytics too, both, and mobile learning as well, going up pretty much right behind online learning. So one more moment before we pose the harder question. And I know that you all know this, but learning analytics is becoming a big area, obviously, in our field, with several programs offering like tracks or certificates in that as well. Awesome. So we seem kind of, we've got a big 3 that's emerged from this list, right? We've got AR, VR, we've got learning analytics and data mining, and we've got online learning. And then underneath that, we have, I believe, 5 that all tied at 4 that I think all of which are still also pretty, pretty prevalent in our field. All right, so now it should switch, but just in case, or if you're just popping in, I'll throw the link back in chat. So now what are some things that might be missing from that list? So what are some things in the field, and these can be tools or strategies. What are some of those types of things that you think might be missing? And again, there's no wrong answers here. Learning experience platforms. All right, that's interesting. Nothing's missing. We did a stand-up job. There we go. Automation. There we go. That's a good one. Automation is another. Oh, hey, video conferencing. Shout out to Zoom. Accessibility. Good, 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 good. Gamification. AI or machine learning. Yep. These are awesome, guys. Couple more seconds in case anybody else is entering anything. These are all great additions to a lot of what we were talking about. And some of them I can see being more nuanced or more specific, then I might could see them fitting in other categories as well. But then some like accessibility, which needs to actually span almost all of those trends. Right, when we think about designing, whether we're designing AR, VR to be accessible or designing online learning to be accessible. Awesome. Well, we just wanted to give a little bit of a time to kind of see what you guys were thinking. So now we're going to transition back into, and so how do those in the field of instructional design often determine what's trending? So often, we'll look at citation analysis. We'll look at the number of research articles that are being, published on specific topics. You might do something like web crawls or things like that, where you're looking for keywords to be mentioned on different websites for different organizations. Or a really common way is expert opinion. So these are all kinds of different ways that people can determine what's trending or what's really popular in our field. But what we are really kind of working on is looking at usage data. So the purpose of our database that we're going to be sharing in just a little bit is looking at usage data in the form often of survey data. And we look at to what extent these trends are being employed. And we're looking at that across multiple settings. So that being K-12, higher education, and then kind of our business and industry and government, kind of like our other category of the other settings where IDT is taking place. And then we're also looking at what people think about these trends. And that usually boils down to what are the benefits of implementing those trends, and then what are the challenges of implementing those trends. So with that being said, I'm going to now pass it over to Dr. Reeser to talk just a little bit about the history of this project.
Thanks, Logan. First, I want to say hello to all the current and particularly former students of the program. I see quite a few of you who I remember quite well from when I was teaching in the program. Glad to see all of you here. With regard to the history of this project, I think as many of you know, I have that textbook, Trends and Issues in Instructional Design and Technology, which I co-edited with Jack Dempsey, also a former student in the program. And after we published the third edition, which was published in 2012, I immediately started thinking about what we should include in the fourth edition. Let's go on to the next slide, Logan, please. Oh, okay. So at that point, I said to myself, okay, we can do, like Logan said, ask experts or people who are very involved in the field, what they think the current trends are. We could look at citation analyses and so on. But if we really want to get a sense of what people are using, what strategies and tools they're using, in the field. A good way to do that would be look at surveys that have been conducted, because surveys are constantly being conducted by organizations like ASTD and others to determine to what extent people in business and industry, for example, or in higher education or in K-12 are using these various tools. So I asked a couple of students who I knew very well to work with me to gather these survey results and use that information to help me figure out what trends we should cover in the next edition of my book. And the team that I asked to work with me involved two doctoral students at the time, Weinan Zhao and Fabrizio Fanara, both of whom now have academic positions. Weinan actually is working at a small university upstate New York, and Fabrizio is working in a university over in Switzerland. Not a bad deal there. And together we started gathering information about these various surveys. Go to the next slide, please. So we started tracking the use of these trends in 2013, just shortly after the third edition of the book was published. And then, as you know, Fabrizio and Weinan would find a survey. We talk about the survey and say, hey, this is a trend we should be following. But then we said, hey, we have so much information here. We need to put it into some kind of system that we can use to keep better track of it. So we started creating, with Weinan's help in particular, a database to gather this data and organize it by trend. So we'd have something like online learning, and below that we'd have 3 or 4 surveys that dealt with online learning. One survey might have been online learning in higher ed, another one might have been online education in K-12, and so on. And so Weinan began to construct this database in 2015. We already had a lot of survey data that had to be inserted into the database. And then starting from 2015 up until the present day, we've been collecting more survey data been done by various organizations that conduct these surveys, and adding it to our database. Originally, the database was only made available to those who were on our team. And the reason for that was we wanted to kind of have privy inside information that could be helpful to me and to the rest of us to get a better sense of what's trending. But the decision was made, I guess, back in about 2017 that, you know, we have all this useful data. Why are we keeping it to ourselves? Let's make it available to the larger community. And in 2018, we made that database available to all ASCT members. And we actually had a special session at ASCT where we unveiled the tool and shared it with the folks there. And there was a lot of excitement about that, and to the public in general. And over the next couple of years, we continued to add information to the database. And then in 2020, with the addition of Jeff Phillips, Logan and Allison, the other 2 presenters today, besides Jeff and myself, were on the project a little earlier. Then we added Jeff, and a new database, or the same database, was redesigned. So that's basically the history of the project. I'm so glad that I've gotten 3 excellent former students now working on it. As a matter of fact, they're doing 95% of the work. I'm kind of in the background now. But I'll turn it back over to Logan and Jeff to talk about what they've done recently.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Reeser. And so just to let you know too, this project, even though he's being very generous, he is still our sage, and we go to him for a lot of advice on steering this project. So before we kind of dive into our new database, and Jeff's going to give y'all a nice walkthrough in just a little bit, then we'll of course share the link. But we wanted to kind of show what the existing original idea, the former and the original idea was, because what we kind of encountered as we started to take the database out, people did not have any complaints about the function, but oftentimes they'd be like, oh, it looks a little dated. It looks a little dated. So we kind of talked about, revitalizing it. And we had to switch platforms. So, but I'll let Jeff tell a little bit more about that, because he's really the brains behind that side of it. But this was originally built in, I believe, Drupal is the programming language that was used, or I guess it's not a language technically, but so you can kind of see here, you could select your trends on the home page. And then as you dove in deeper, you may go to a specific trend, and then this is what the data would look like. So this is Weinan's original design. So you can see that most items that are in the database aren't coded as only one thing, because often when items are entered, there's several different trends that are being mentioned. And so this is just one example of a bit of expert opinion that we did include as well in here. So you can just see these are what the top 12 people said. So now, with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff for the real fun of showing you all the new product and walking you through and demonstrating the features. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to you, Jeff.
Fantastic. I think that was the most seamless transfer of share screens ever. So yeah, I think a big thing that we wanted to focus on was ahead of time getting that feedback that we received from others about, hey, these would be ways to improve the website and the database. And we focused really on that. A lot of this is still formative evaluation, and we are always making improvements. But I think a big thing we did is we wanted to use WordPress. Now you might say WordPress is an intervention. What was the need, right? But really a lot of it was we wanted to have a more recent kind of feel to the website. WordPress had that. We also wanted to kind of integrate more PHP on the back end. So WordPress also integrates real well with PHP-MyAdmin. So what we really focused on was we need to have users able to create accounts. We need to, be able to import pictures. On the backside, we wanted to make it an easier way to add new data. Another thing we really wanted to focus on is how do we integrate this in different environments? So instead of just being, a tool for research, how do we use this as a tool to promote teaching? So open educational resource. How do we make this a way to make people, as Dr. Denham would say, producers, where you're not just learning about trends, you're actually contributing. So these were a few of the things we thought, and these were our goals before designing. A lot of the issue with designing this is there are things we want to do and we have to figure out how to do them. A lot of the plugins in WordPress aren't doing it. So a lot of us is kind of like trial and error and trying to figure out how to make things, even better. This is the main homepage now. We went with kind of a blog feel because that seemed familiar to a lot of people. And if we have different audiences, how do we make this as user-friendly as possible? So a lot of it, if you look, we have the top, but you can create a login. So something we want to do in the future is make it so it will send you new notifications of when a new trend is added on, whatever trend you're interested in. So you'd be able to select trends. But additionally, you would be able to add new data. And I'll show you that in a sec. The main homepage, one thing we like to do, we like to put most recently added items. And the thing is, we want you to have like a snapshot of being able to see it. But if you expanded, you would get more metadata, so to say. You'd get more information. You would also get, charts, and then you can enlarge the images. Because we are getting survey data, a lot of it is and only because I imagine we'll get this question a little bit. We reproduce all the images. So if you are wondering, like, oh, well, what about copyright and different things like that? We take the data and produce our own images based on it. And we did focus on accessibility and color schemes that, are better for accessibility online. But for the trend side, pretty much you can search by trends. You could go through all of them if you wanted. AR, VR seems really popular today, having seen a bunch of y'all mentioned that one. So we'll go ahead and click on AR, VR just as an example. But we try to make the search feature as easy as possible. One thing we do, and we'll, now that we're at another year, one thing we do is we like to put images of Web of Science to let you know how has it been trending. So not only is this something that there's a lot of survey data on right now, you would be able to see the number of publications as determined by Web of Science on this topic if you did a topic search in Web of Science. So pretty much a way to say, okay, we can see this has gotten really popular in the last, well, I'd say since 2017. On these, you can search. We put in, regular search function if there's a title you're looking for or something like that. Of course, same expand, or you could go by year published if you're looking for more recent things like that. What I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to go ahead in the chat. I'm going to put the link to it now that you've seen a brief description and explanation and driving of the website. Feel free to investigate it yourself, or you can keep following me and watching me as well. If you were going to add new data, we try to make this as easy as possible too. Add new data, you could just select all the trend types that it could be a part of, data, title, year published, and then you have the opportunity to add an image. Of course, we would change the image to whatever color scheme we use for accessibility. But This is, I think, the big part that we're trying to focus more on now is how do we get this in courses more, and how do we increase, the amount of entries we have by, making this more of kind of like a wiki almost. So instead of it just being, we create everything, we really want to make this more of kind of an OER resource for more trends. We screen everything. So if that's your next question, well, what if someone just throws some images in there? Nothing immediately goes in until after, we go in on the back end and check it and reformat it and, make sure the URLs and things are correct. Other ways you can search, instead of just going by trend, if you are in a course Logan, Allison, and I teach, there are a lot of students who happen to be interested in setting K through 12. So you could also say, I'm looking for specific trends, through K through 12 or higher ed, depending on who your audience is, or depending, on your research, and then also category. Of course, the new trend, if you wanted to say what's new that wasn't on there, learning in a pandemic is a big one that we've been adding a lot of stuff to right now. So there is new data in here, and we screen pretty much, I would say every few months or every month or so, we screen a bunch of new literature to add new stuff into the database. One other thing we have for you today, there is an ASKe February link up here. And in this link, as you are browsing through the website right now, feel free to provide any feedback, anything that you think would help or make the website better right now. We're really interested in using your feedback to improve the website at all times. And anytime we present on this, we get a lot of great feedback that we also incorporate. So it's really a way to kind of make sure this database is for everyone. And these trends, as Dr. Reeser said, aren't just for us and specific researchers. How do we open this to everyone? So that's a big part of the website. Right now, I'll actually give you a few minutes to search.
Jeff, I don't want to interfere with your presentation here, but I think it'd be interesting maybe to share with the group one example of the type of survey data that we've collected so they could see, for example, in K-12, perhaps one of the trends in K-12, and some data that shows that this particular trend is, or this particular innovation is being used a lot.
Absolutely. And in doing it, just so you can see where I went, so you also have the opportunity to know what's the best way to kind of approach that. We could go by setting. So we could search by setting and go right into K-12. And then from there, if there is a trend type you were interested in, we could search the trend type. We could also, kind of do a quick scan and see, wow, there's a lot of AR, VR coming through on that. So you could do it alphabetical order, or you could do it by year. But for example, let's do one of the AR, VR ones. Let's do AR-VR as a search. And then let's also start scrolling to see what's new. So something from 2020. So on this one, you can see the frequency of ed tech usage if we are focusing in a K through 12 setting on AR, VR. And if I enlarge this, the sample description would tell you where did they get this data from. So this is from elementary school educators from 111 schools, and you can see the reference entry. Another great thing is we do put the URL a lot of times if it's available. So similar to any of you who like to search and say, I wish we had the DOI number, with that URL, you could also try and get right to it. But the data, for example, on this example, you can see ed tech used in the classroom. And the survey data is basically talking about the percentage of respondents and what web tech they're using in that K through 12 environment.
Yeah, so in this example, we see that 8% of the respondents said they were using VR. So as it was pointed out earlier, either by Logan and or Jeff, sometimes a survey data fits within more than one category. In this case, I guess this same report would appear if you clicked on video, web-based tools, and so on. But it gives you a sense of whatever tool you're interested in, to what extent is that tool being used in this environment, at least based upon this piece of survey data. And you have multiple pieces of survey data where this information is presented. So again, it's not just people's opinions about what's being used, although there is opinion data in here as well. A lot of it is based on actual usage by people out there. So you really get a sense of, wow, this is a trend that's really getting more and more popular in this particular learning environment. It's something that I need to know more about, or in my case, this is something I should include in the next edition of my book, or perhaps this is a trend I should cover in my class. So I think it's very useful data, and I'm delighted that our group is trying to get more and more people to participate in this, so we can even add more data to the base, making it more useful to more folks. Jeff,
Absolutely.
I'll stop my interruption right there.
No, I love it. As Logan said earlier, we're a very informal style of presenting. And just to say, here would be all the trend types. As Dr. Reese was saying, hey, maybe it goes in other trends as well. So it isn't limited to just one. And again, we do review every entry that's added. So we'll look at stuff and add more trends. I think a big thing is it a trend in instructional design, or is it a different type of trend that perhaps just happens in an educational setting? So a lot of that is searching to make sure it's survey data from trends that focus on instructional design. If you do feel like creating an account, also feel free to create an account right now. And user profile, for example, this is where you could edit your information. This is where we hope to have where you can select the trends you like, and each time a new trend pops up, we can have it auto email you and let you know that there's new survey data about your trend. Give you a little bit more time to search. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask right now as well.
Jeff, I have a question about just a technical question about
Yeah.
setting up the web. You mentioned you excuse me, you mentioned you use WordPress, and you briefly touched on a few issues with plugins. Could you go into a little bit more detail, like how challenging was it, or what, did you have to call like some sophisticated computer scientist, or were you able to navigate through most of the technical difficulties?
That's a great question. One caveat, I am not a computer scientist. However, I do have previous coding experience. So having based this upon what our goals, we couldn't stick to a lot of plugins. So for example, when you think about something just like add new data, there wasn't a plugin that was capable of doing all this that we wanted to do at the same time. So I actually had to write this through another plugin called Snippets. I had to code all this data. So when it inputs stuff, I had to code that it talks to the database on the back end, and then make sure I coded so injection attacks wouldn't occur and things like that. And then even weird, strange things like, okay, if you select a file to upload, but if you use a file name that already exists, it's going to copy over the previous one. So make it, do its own file name based on system clock and things like that. So a lot of it is based on, we had to create that. For the search feature, we did use a plugin. I'll have to remember what that one's called right now. I've been working on it all day. But for example, in that search, the one thing it doesn't do, and this seems so easy, and in HTML, it would be an easy thing to do. Something as easy as, I would love to click on this image and it enlarge. The plugin doesn't actually do that. The plugin doesn't have that feature. What I was able to do is use dynamic hyperlinks, and I'm so sorry if I'm getting like really dorky on the talk here. I was able to incorporate dynamic hyperlinks that would enlarge an image. But yes, as you say, the problem with plugins is they don't have all the features you would want, and you can code it all, but that's a lot as well. There are also in WordPress, if you're not familiar, there's certain plugins that don't play well with the other plugins. So a lot of times you'll end up trying to find ones that work well together.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And to add, I'll just say sometimes when they update plugins, the certain functionalities totally disappear. We had one instance where our pop-up stopped working, and Jeff did all of this digging and spent like a good bit of time, and Allison was like, maybe the thing updated, and Jeff went and rolled it back, and it immediately fixed our issue. So it's definitely a lot of trial and error, and Jeff really has owned that task very well. So
just a lot of trial and error. Formative evaluation within formative evaluation, right?
What's your distribution plan on this?
That's a great question. So Jeff, feel free to chime in too. I think in terms of sharing, we share this through ACT typically every year in some capacities, and we have been sharing it. Right now we're trying to focus more on, we're finally kind of getting the database where I think we want it to kind of start sharing it this way as well, like with different, like through, like our alumni network, through other presentations. So right now those are our big ways. I don't think we don't foresee, we have like a social media plan as well. But one of the hardest pieces on this is that, this is, it's a task that the three of us all are passionate about, but there's the four of us, but there's four of us. So it's hard to get all of the pieces running, at the same time. So it's a really good question though.
I think that's the big thing, keeping it open, is we're a lot of it is crowdsourcing. A lot of it is, hey, would you like to use this in your course? One thing we're focusing on in future presentations and workshops is having like, here's a lesson plan that worked previously, and here's how we implemented it. So even providing ideas on, this is how you could implement this in your course, or even, this is how you could use it for your research. So I think a lot of that is going, in conferences, kind of promoting it as, here's what you could do with it, instead of having to rely on them coming up with the ideas. We have ideas how it worked in the past.
That's a good point, Jeff. Logan, why don't you talk a little bit about how you're making use of it in the classes you teach?
Sure, I will. So like in one of my courses, I use this, it's in our trends and issues course, essentially. I use this and I have students break into groups and investigate some of our trends that have the highest number of, the highest entries, essentially, so that they have plenty of data to look at. And they essentially have to talk about how the trend is being implemented in all of the three settings. And then they have to make a plan for how they would implement the trend in those settings as well. So for example, if they're working on, if they chose to do K-12 and they chose to do AR/VR, they have to essentially come up with a plan for how they would then implement AR or VR. But first they kind of talk about to what extent it's being used as kind of like that's kind of like the impetus to start the conversation. And then they move into actually coming up with a plan for utilizing that. I will say one thing that I love about this, that I really like using this tool, is because I teach in a predominantly K-12 program. And a lot of people that come into our field, or come into our program rather, they think our field is essentially teaching with technology, and it's just technology integration. And so this tool is a really great way for me to show them like, oh, hey, it's not, like, without me explicitly beating them over the head with like, instructional design and technology is about more than just the technology. This is a way that I kind of, it implicitly, I guess it really complements me attempting to beat them over the head, because I do constantly tell them that, what you're getting a degree in is more than, integrating technology into a classroom or into your teaching.
Yeah, so whether you're interested in K-12, higher education, business and industry, those are the three categories in which we classify the various surveys. You can use this data in various ways. Logan or Jeff, could you give us some examples of how people who are not teaching in our field but are working in our field could make use of or have made use of this data?
I can give a couple of examples, and I can't say like with confidence that this is the person that did this, but in some of our instances where we presented this database in previous iterations, we had a mid-career faculty talk about how looking at some of this data and the data points was actually making them consider how they were going to transition and refine their research agenda as they worked from associate to full. Like they were going to actually hone in on something, because like looking at the data, they were like, I can't remember the exact trend at that point or what the item was, but they were like, this is really helpful and has me seeing like a gap about usage. And so like, this might be an area that I want to explore. I have other like ideas on how people could use it, but that's like, I don't want to also spoil too much of, because I would love to hear what y'all also think. What ways could you use this database? So maybe it's a good time, Jeff, for me to switch back to, sorry, there goes our seamlessness.
I was too fast on the stop share.
Okay, so maybe it's a good time for us to kind of switch back and talk about kind of some of our group discussed, like some of the things we wanted to talk to y'all about today and get your perspectives. And so again, there's no wrong answers to any of these questions. So Jeff, I'll let you take it back away.
Yeah, sure. And feel free to type in the chat, or feel free to turn your mic on. Either way. A few group discussion, just for everyone, of course, is how would you and others in our field use this tool? So what would you do in professional practice? And of course, options. We have students here, we have faculty members here, we have practitioners here. As Logan said, there's no wrong answer. We're just interested in having a conversation. Promoting dialogue, I guess, so to say.
I'm never one to be hesitant to speak up. As a faculty member, when I was a faculty member and I was directing doctoral students, oftentimes the doctoral students wouldn't know what area to focus their research on, or they'd come to me and just say, I'm interested in this. And I'd be thinking to myself, God, that's an awfully narrow area. So I think this tool is very helpful, as it was for this mid-career professional that Logan mentioned, to help people who are new to our field or fairly new to the field see what the most popular trends are now and choose a trend they might want to focus their research on. And usually that initial choice, if indeed they pursue their dissertation work in that area, or even if they're a master's student who's going to go out in the real world and do work in business and industry or K-12 or higher ed, they can say, hey, this is an area which I really think I should be focusing on because people who work in this area use this particular trend. So I think it's very helpful in helping people, whether they're trying to decide their research or where they want to focus their career aspirations on, can use to help them make those decisions.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that. And I know there's a few practitioners here as well. Practitioner possible use.
Hey everyone, Becky here. Love this. Love that I get to see some of your faces. So it's really nice to connect. So I work at J&J and lead a community of practice for essentially learning and development professionals within the organization. So this would be great to share just for research, right? Ideas or things that they want to implement within the business. And then also having the research to back it up. So when they go to their leaders and they want to maybe do something new, they can have the research base and not just an idea that they had.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, that definitely seems relevant and something we'd want to focus on. I guess it's a good time to move to that second question, basically off what you just said. What could be done to make this tool more useful in your scenario or in other scenarios? And don't worry, you won't hurt our feelings. We're all about improving this tool all the time.
Hey, Jeff, so good to see you and everyone else. So I was just wondering, like the difference between just using this as like a lurker versus like getting in, like actually registering. Like would you be able to like save your like favorite trends so you can just like easily look at them instead of just like having to search every time?
Yes, and exactly. And not an idea we mentioned. Yeah, that would absolutely be it. Under the profile part, it would focus on your trends. And then, because really how we would set it up is whatever that is, that's how it would know what to email you.
Yeah,
So,
okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, that's such a great idea, though, especially because there are a lot of drop downs and things to get to your favorite trends. Yeah, that also leads to something else we want to focus on, keeping the current trends more updated, and then having a second part for like previous trends.
Gotcha.
I say it every time, but like MOOCs, like if MOOCs aren't in research as much right now, we don't want to get rid of them. We would just put them in, maybe past trends.
Yeah, more like past versus emerging almost. But
right.
Yeah, really, really cool. Really cool to see.
Thanks, Nicole.
Another thing, Nicole, like just one of the benefits of having the account is that producer, is that right, Jeff? Am I using Dr. Denon's word correctly? Like being able to add data into the database. We do have to have the account feature just because we thought it was one more level of like security. So I love the saving the trends, because like that made me rethink how like we were envisioning like an email blast, But instead, if you can just log in and that's what's primarily there, that's much easier. So I think that's a fantastic idea. And I bet you we might can find a plugin that can do that instead of what we were possibly going to have to write to make by we, I mean, make poor Jeff write. So
yes, less coding for Jeff.
But we do like to get more people to sign up and add information because, right now there's only 3 people, Jeff, Allison, and Logan, who are having to scan the data that's out there, the various sources that are out there, and find information we can add to the database. In some cases, they're using students or colleagues to do that, but it's basically a 3-person effort. I just sit back there and glow in the glory of what they're doing. But getting more people involved would be great. So we're hoping that more people will not only look at the data, but make suggestions as to pieces of data we can add.
Definitely, we definitely want it to become more of like a, I think we kind of, when we originally pitched it, we were like calling it crowdsource, right? Like, we wanted to crowdsource that data like screening process because it is very time consuming. I can kind of give y'all like a, we finally have moved. When we originally started, we had signed up for different like newsletters and we looked for certain trends. So we had like all these, so my Gmail account still probably gets like, I swear it feels like 40 to 60 emails a day for things that I've signed up for to like check for when like new reports are published and things like that. We finally moved and we made a stock Gmail where it all goes there. So when we sign up for new things, but it is really a lot of work and it's a lot of sifting through. So we always, I feel confident there's always stuff that we do miss or that slips through the cracks, unfortunately. So we thought that this way might be a really good way to hopefully fill those gaps. And Jeff, did you want to talk a little bit more about Julie's idea? Because I thought that was a really great suggestion too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Julie, feel free to expand upon it. I think a great option would be up top to have like a lesson plans or content. And then were you thinking more like here's the actual like systematic design of a lesson plan and assessment tools, or are you thinking of like examples of how this worked previously?
Yeah, I'm thinking more of examples because that's what I try to do. I'm an instructional designer at Georgia Southern University in Savannah, Georgia. And I try to share, since I'm like a key point among faculty of different disciplines, I try to share different strategies that other ones implement that have proven to be successful.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great idea. Especially as we try and get to like that open pedagogy kind of world, maybe having a way to kind of talk about this is how this has worked, but I didn't think about it from the instructional designer standpoint. So I think that's a fantastic idea to also kind of go with. Maybe we'd be forming our own trends at that point.
Jeff has these 3 questions posted here, and he had kind of turned our attention to the second one. We're happy to get you to provide input with regard to any of these 3. I'm particularly interested in the 3rd question, because here we have 3 young professionals who are doing work in this area, adding very useful information to the database. Prior to that, we had 3 others, myself and Fabrizio and Waynon. And, we have all this data in there and we see interest in the database and people using it, but not to the extent that we'd like. So if you have any thoughts about how we could generate more interest in the database, maybe you think, hey, nobody else is likely to be interested, that's fine too. But if you have any thoughts about that issue or any other 2 listed here, we'd love to hear it. Would anybody like to comment on that? What can we do?
This is Jenny. I can't comment on the last one, but the first one, I really see this useful in my work. I look for work for the legislature, and sometimes I have to produce, a lot of times I have to produce lit reviews on certain topics, or I have to update certain staff, and not so much members anymore, but staff on especially trends in these areas, considering how they were doing a lot of online learning this year, especially K-12 and all of those issues. So for me, this is really going to be helpful. And I have to think about the last one, how to generate more interest. And because I'm not sure you'd want people, maybe certain research in the state government. I don't know who those would be, whose people would be.
Jenny, I'm really glad to hear your thoughts about making use of it in your own work. And I want to give a big shout out to you. Jenny was one of my master's students and has been active over the years in our alumni association. So I really liked your comment and glad to hear you.
Yep. Thanks.
I have a question about scope creep, because I'm sure it could just explode, right? So how are you keeping the scope to instructional design, trends within instructional design, but also supporting maybe the interdependencies with like user experience or user interface that kind of relate to or work with instructional design?
What a fantastic question, Becky. Yeah, it's really hard. So one of our methods that we kind of have used now is a lot of, typically when we have started crawling through data and pulling data, the three of us, Jeff, Allison, and I, talk about it, and that's typically becomes the question. And a lot of times we're kind of like, okay, this is interesting, but does it fit with what we're doing? So I would say that it's just kind of like through our conversations right now. But you know, we've got what clearly like our purpose and what our established goals are for the website, and we always try to anchor back to those. But I do know there's plenty of times where we see something and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, like let's put this on there. And then when we talk through it, like I'm very guilty of this. When we talk through it, I'm suddenly like, okay, y'all are right. Like this doesn't actually fit with what we're trying to accomplish and what's the purpose of the database.
Yeah, that makes yeah.
I'm sorry. It sounds like you all have a quality control internal process. I know it's probably not formal, but it has to go. I think Jeff mentioned earlier that people can upload stuff, but someone has to approve it on your end. And I think, is that where the conversation takes place? Is this going to be something that goes into the database or not?
Yeah, well, I will say to that, yes, that would be when we were approving, but right now we really don't have many people using the tool in that format outside of our team. So typically what we've been doing is having that conversation before we upload data. And like we kind of, you probably aren't super interested in our process, but we have a giant spreadsheet that like once we've kind of collected the reports, like the reports are on like a OneDoc, and we link out, and then we link to essentially each individual piece of data to where we're able to create and track pretty much and put all the information in a spreadsheet for us to then upload. So we kind of use that as our like discussion point right now to determine, okay, is this viable? Is this something we want to include? And we do that before we adapt it to save us the headache if we decide not to include it, that we didn't adapt all this data to our new color scheme for nothing. So.
I'm thinking of so another way maybe to generate the interest is I'm currently launching, like my team is launching a bunch of, not the same thing, but essentially like platforms and systems, right? So we create what we call explainer videos, essentially like a marketing video of how to use it. You know, maybe for this one, it's how to put in an entry or like key task that we want the end user to do. And then we have that available because I know you have your how to use the database. So maybe that might be a good place to store some type of video or tutorial on how to use it.
I think that's a great idea, Becky. It's funny, in our previous iteration, our attempt was to make it intuitive enough to where you didn't need a video, but I really do think it would still help. And even if it is intuitive enough, the video won't hurt or detract from anything.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea.
Our next step is more user testing to kind of see, how people are using the database and how they understand it. But among an audience of instructional designers, yeah, video would also be easy to put in there. And really anything that, can help promote using it is, I think, key. So yeah, thanks. That's a great idea.
In terms of submissions, are you looking primarily at like meta studies or like narrowly focused? So like I have studies that we've done for like a public diplomacy context, but they're very narrowly focused within public diplomacy. So what's your level set on submissions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically if it's, we have stuff in here that's like just about math, but it's like math, but it's the integration of like technology or, the integration of VR or educational games. So even if it is set to a specific discipline, if it still is addressing one of the trends, and especially if it fits into kind of like our categories, and typically, most of the survey data that we put in is from kind of like a larger scale, setting. It's not so much like, so it's like usually from like some of the larger organizations like Project Tomorrow or even like ATD. So like it really kind of depends on like I said, a couple of those factors. Is there a trend still present? Is it usage, or is it their beliefs towards it? So as long as it kind of fits those categories, we usually still put it in there.
And that's kind of another thing we briefly talked about. All three of us really chat while we're going through all these. It's not really like one person does it. Like we all talk and we're like, hey, it's this, and what do you think about this? Is this too much? Math is a great example, because as we were doing it the other day, I was super interested in this math thing and kept being like, oh, it just seems so interesting. So we all kind of talk it over. So if there was, data that was extremely specific, but did focus on the trend, I mean, that absolutely would, be something we would consider, just because it's the trend we're interested in, and how the trend's represented by the survey data.
I did want to touch on Julie's comment, and sorry, somebody else.
Go ahead, Logan.
I just wanted to touch on that. One of the reasons why we added learning in a pandemic as a trend on there, if you dig into that category, you'll see there's not really anything that like is only tagged as learning in a pandemic. We use that to kind of tag things like reports that were coming out about COVID. So we put it in there as a trend, but it's kind of like really like a separate tag. But from doing that, we were able to look through actually all of the reports collectively that have come out so far. We do still have some that are in the process of getting in there that have that tag specifically, but we're able to look at those and kind of see like what were some of the common things that kind of emerged throughout all of these different reports from different agencies regarding that. Because like you have stuff about like you have reports about like online learning, but it's about like emergency remote instruction or emergency remote teaching. And we were like, well, let's not just like, let's not add that as its own trend, because like that's a very specific thing. Let's still keep it as like online learning, because it is still kind of like a subset. But like, let's use learning in a pandemic as a way to tag that so that we know that this was talking specifically about like the, online learning in the response to COVID-19. So your bigger question is, I don't know if we are post-pandemic yet, though. So,
and a lot of that information is just coming out now from how long it takes the research process to occur. Yeah, I think that's a big thing, is that it's really how does learning in a pandemic relate to one of those other trends, and until we have enough data to say we know a trend just from learning in the pandemic. At this point, it kind of like piggybacks on another trend.
I don't know if this would be outside of the scope of like this specific project, and it's not going to be applicable to like everything that's listed on this database, but maybe having some like links to tools for people to use if they want to like implement that trend, like just like quick links to things, especially people who aren't like, up to date in what people are actually using, just kind of having that as like a resource for people to use if they want to like implement that.
I really like that idea. So, a person may not be that familiar with the trend, thinks that particular innovation might be appropriate to use in his or her environment. Giving them an article they could turn to where they discuss issues with that would be very useful. Good idea.
Thanks.
I think that also kind of goes with the how could we use this for students? Because I'm going to make an assumption. A lot of people on this call right now took a trends and issues class in instructional design. So it is kind of like, how does that relate on both sides?
Yeah, I think on that point too, Nicole, like I think that's really helpful, because like, maybe you don't quite understand like what if we ever to add like machine learning right in as a category, like there's sometimes where I'm like, is that machine learning?
Right,
So,
exactly.
like, giving those clear, like, giving like a clear, like, some clear information on each of the trends would, I think, just it would be a great benefit. So.
Jeff and Logan, this is something we've talked about in the past. Maybe you can comment briefly on it. A lot of the trends, most of the trends we've listed are kind of tools as opposed to methodologies. Could you talk a little bit about that and why that's the case, or what are your thoughts when I bring that up?
You want to go first, Jeff, or you want me? Okay, I'll go first. So I think it's because tools are easier to not be I'm going to say misconceptualized, but that's not what I mean. Like tools are going to have an easier, clean cut thing. Whereas like, we have PBL in here, for example, or even if we just, problem-based learning means a lot to a lot of different people. Whereas like whether or not I integrate social media into my classroom is a little, like possibly a little clearer. So I think that a lot of the reasons why that a lot of the tools a lot of the trends that we have in the database are tools. It's just kind of like the nature of the actual like data collection process itself. And that's easier to say whether or not I'm using like AR, VR, rather than that I'm using PBL to design AR, VR, or making AR, VR, integrating AR, VR into PBL lessons.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense.
Also for our settings, finding something that is appropriate for business, higher ed, and K-12. Sometimes if we get too much into method or methodology, a lot of the K-12 people would be like, this isn't what I'm necessarily looking for. And, you don't want to have like that data smog of entries where some are methodologies and some are tools, and you have to kind of create that other layer of search.
I hate
Any
to
other
stop.
questions? Oh, sorry.
I hate to stop a good thing because I think we're going in a wonderful direction and it's great, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we are right at 1 o'clock. So thank you, Logan, Jeff, and Dr. Reeser for joining us. We hope that all of you have a wonderful day, and we'll continue from there.
Good seeing y'all.
Yeah, thanks. Jeff and Logan, if you could stay on for a few minutes, Demetrius would keep the site active. But I want to thank everybody for coming. And I really enjoyed seeing in particular the former students who decided to come to this session. Delightful to see you all.
Great seeing everyone. Bye.
Yes, so
Thank
great
y'all
seeing
for
you all.
coming.
Yes, thank y'all so much.